Yo, what is up guys? It's Pedro here, and in today's video I want to talk about Trey Hendrickson and why the Washington Commanders will not be trading for him despite what everyone is wanting or thinks will happen. Also some interesting updates for the Washington Commanders preseason game. We'll talk about that, some injury updates and more. If you guys are new, make sure to subscribe, hit that like button and that notification bell as well so you never miss a video. Alright. So, and also stay tuned, we'll be talking about a trade that an NFC East rival made this Sunday afternoon, I guess. So, the news came out, Ian Rappaport, all the guys, they basically said, all the reporters were like, Bengals are listening to trade offers for perennial Pro Bowler Trey Hendrickson, and it's just another step in the wrong direction for that negotiation. And I saw a bunch of Commanders fans saying, all right, now's the Commanders' chance. Let's go get Trey Hendrickson. And yes, Trey Hendrickson would make this team a lot better. They got Von Miller. He's cool. He's nice. He's a good rotational piece. And at best can give you like 50% of snaps, and that is like the best case scenario. And even then I think that's reaching it. Probably like 45-ish 40% is your best case scenario for Von Miller. So he's not a full-time, even if he starts, he's not going to be a full-time player. It's most likely going to be like Dietrich Wise, getting more of those reps and just a rotation, besides Armstrong, who's probably going to get a lot of snaps. So Hendrickson would definitely help. We know, in the last 3 years, he's leading the league in sacks. 2024, 17 and a half the year before, 35 sacks in 2 years. So maybe, I guess he's leading the league in sacks in the last 2 years. In 2022, a little bit of down year, 8 sacks. Year before 14, year before 13 and a half sacks. So, he's definitely been producing for sure. But here's the reason why it's not going to work. First, the Commanders are already dealing with their own contract situation with Terry McLaurin, and we don't even got to talk about that. We'll see when that gets done, but that's a whole fiasco, and it's just a bad look if you trade for Hendrickson and you extend him, give him a lot of money, and then Terry's like, well, you just paid this guy 35, 36, 37 mil a year. He's an aging edge rusher, and you're giving him this money. How is that going to make him feel? That's first off, because we really haven't talked about Hendrickson in a while, and I just want to talk about it because I saw a lot of people mentioning it, and I just don't think it's going to happen. But when we were talking about him, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, 4 months ago, kind of the prime time of that was like free agency into the middle of the off season. But the last month or two, we really haven't talked about it. At that point, those different points, we weren't really worried about Terry. Yeah, it was something that we knew was going to be somewhat of an issue at some point where, we were hoping it wouldn't. But we were like, all right, in the back of our mind, we always, we're like, we got to get this done. Not us, but the Commanders got to get it done. And, 3 months ago, it wasn't, a big issue. So we're like, all right, well, we can do both. Right now, though, I don't think that's the case. Also, another thing is, since then, the Commanders' draft capital has, diminished. Not necessarily since 2 months ago, but since the early talks in like February, March. They traded for Deebo Samuel. It's not a big deal, but it's a 5th-round pick. They traded for Laramie Tunsil, and that is that's multiple picks. We can go, Commanders 2026 draft capital is not a lot. It is not a lot, and you're not going to have the capital that they want. You're not going to want, you're not going to have the capital that they want in a trade. So, so they have a 1st-round pick, a 3rd-round pick, a 5th-round pick, a 6th-round pick, and a 7th-round pick. So they are missing a 2nd-round pick and a 4th-round pick. They do not have a lot of picks. They have fewer picks, I guess the same amount of picks as they had last year, but this time they don't have the 2nd-round pick and a 4th-round pick, which, diminishes the value, even more than they had last year, because last year they had a 1st and 2nd. They didn't have a 3rd, so, and, they had a 4th. So it makes it a lot harder to make these moves. Maybe if the Commanders want to make a, trade a player, I don't know who they would trade in that scenario. maybe you trade, he doesn't have much value, but, Javonte Jean-Baptiste as one guy, maybe Johnny Newton, but I don't know if Commanders fans would want to do that. And then you still might have to give up some picks because, the Bengals, picks would be nice for them, but they're trying to win now. They just paid Jamar Chase. They paid T. Higgins. They paid Burrow recently. They're trying to win now, and, not getting a player back for Hendrickson's probably not on the table. And, there was some reports of a couple teams that were interested. I forgot who it was. I know it was like the Browns and maybe 49ers. I'll pull up the tweet here. And speaking of, the Eagles did trade for John Mechie, a player that I thought maybe the Commanders would have some interest in. Maybe not trading, but a player I thought, okay, maybe they'll go ahead and, because I was pretty not sure, but that the Texans would cut him, or trade him, and, maybe the Commanders could go after him, but the Eagles got him, but the Panthers, Browns, and Colts are teams interested in Hendrickson. I mentioned 49ers. I guess that was another team that was interested in John Mechie. But, I don't think it's going to happen, but I did want to discuss it because I did see in some of these comments a lot of Commanders fans asking if they should do it or saying that they should do it. And it makes somewhat sense, but when you go deeper down and you look at their salary cap situation, which isn't terrible, but with the optics, with the Terry situation, and then also that should be your main focus, and then also you don't have a lot of draft capital for the future. All of that combined, it's just a recipe for disaster for a Trey Hendrickson trade, unless his value goes down the gutter, and you're talking about like a 5th round pick for Trey Hendrickson, which, if that's the case, everyone's going to be going for that, which means that's not his value. So that's like the only scenario where it would make a lot of sense. Or if they, the Commanders get a Terry deal done and they move on from maybe one of the players on the D-line or another player on that defense that maybe the Bengals like, then in that scenario, it would somewhat make sense. All right, let's get into some other stuff. So starters will be getting some work versus the Bengals. They don't know how much. Like John Keim says here, could be more than one series, but if, Jaden Daniels and company, they get a full, 12-play drive, 75-yard, 12-play drive that takes like 7-8 minutes up, I think in that scenario, Dan Quinn's going to be like, you know what, that's fine. We'll go ahead, we'll take that and rest our starters for the rest of the game. Also, though, they're not getting that playing time in the joint scrimmage, but Dan Quinn said that didn't impact his decision in terms of how much the starters are going to play in this game. I don't necessarily buy that 100%. I think he might give them a little bit more work, not a quarter more, 2 quarters more, but maybe a series more. If the first series is if the first series is a 3 and out, you got to play them more. Give them some more. And I'm talking about the offense. You got to give them some more series. And it doesn't need a 100% line up with, the defense and the offense. This shouldn't be a huge test for the Commanders offense. The Bengals defense is not very good. And then in terms of the Commanders defense, they're getting a really good test. I am super excited to see this cornerback trio. How do they go match up against Jamar Chase? I was about to say Marshawn Lattimore. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. Like, those guys are elite receivers. T. Higgins is an elite number 2. He's a number 1 on some teams. And then Jamar Chase is the best receiver in football. Him and Justin Jefferson. The LSU wide receiver factory now. So I would like to see Trey Amos, whether it's on T. Higgins or Jamar Chase. Let's see how he does. I'm not expecting him to allow no catches. If he does, that's great. But I do want to see him competing out there and, showing that cornerback 1 energy that he does have. I want to see that. And then also, making some plays. Again, he's going to get beat. I would expect him to. He's playing against, 2 stud receivers. But, I want to see him making some plays and standing up to. And, who knows? Maybe he gets an interception. Who knows? It's a good, really, really good matchup for him. And then also Marshawn Lattimore. I want to see him going up against whoever it is because that, he should be looking good against them. Even though it is, the receivers are good. This is what he's going to have to go up against not necessarily Jamar Chase, but he's going up against number one receivers a lot this year. And he's going to have, A.J. Brown, right? He had some up and down battles against A.J. Brown. So this will help prepare him for that. And also give us an idea of where he is, health-wise, and just how good of a player he is now versus last year. Was the last year, when we were watching him, was it bad because of the injury, or is he just not the same player? I think it was because of the injury. But let's see what he looks like against Jamar Chase this week. I think that'll be a really good test in terms of how good he's going to look this year. But that's it for today's video. Hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, hit that like button, subscribe if you guys are new, and peace.